Russia is claiming Ukraine is now attacking with graphite bombs. If that's true, Ukraine may have just unlocked a way to shut down power without blowing anything up. Every now and then, something pops up in this war that makes you stop and go, wait, are we doing that now? That's where we are today. Russian sources are claiming that Ukrainian drones are carrying graphite-based warheads and using them to strike targets in occupied territory, which is Ukrainian territory. No official confirmation, no clean evidence, just footage, debris, and a lot of speculation. But here's the thing, even if this is only partially true, the idea itself is very real and it's been used before by the United States, in, most recently, Venezuela. Hey friends, Wes here, veteran of the US Army and the US Air Force, which means I was underpaid twice, and yes, we absolutely had weapons designed to turn off entire countries. We just didn't talk about it at parties. So what is a graphite bomb? Well, a graphite bomb is designed to shut off electricity, not destroy a building, not really level a city, not crater a runway, just turn the lights off. Inside the weapon are extremely fine carbon filaments. Think microscopic strands of conductive material, almost like metallic dust that floats through the air. When the munition disperses, those fibers drift down and settle onto power infrastructure. Transformers, switch yards, high voltage lines. And when those fibers land, they create short circuits. Electricity jumps across them, arcs, overheats, and trips the system offline. The result is a blackout. Now, these aren't explosives in the traditional sense, they're more like electrical sabotage. The graphite itself is conductive. When current hits it, it vaporizes and creates an ionized channel, which then allows even more current to flow. That escalates into a cascading failure that forces the grid to shut down. So instead of physically destroying the infrastructure, you're exploiting how it works. You're turning the system against itself. The engineers who built the grid made it resilient against physical damage. They buried cables, they reinforced substations, redundant switching, but they didn't design it to handle a cloud of conductive fibers settling over a 400 kilovolt switchyard like snow. That's the elegant brutality of this weapon. It doesn't fight the infrastructure, it uses it. Now, this isn't new. The United States used graphite bombs in the Gulf War. The weapon was called the BLU-114 Bravo, and it was delivered by Tomahawk cruise missiles and F-117 Nighthawks. The results were dramatic. Roughly 85% of Iraq's electrical grid went offline. That's not really a precision strike on a power plant. That's really more of a national-level blackout achieved without putting a single crater in a turbine hall. NATO used them again in Serbia in 1999 during Operation Allied Force. Roughly 70% of the country's electricity went out. Serbian air defenses, which had been giving NATO fits, suddenly had very serious problems keeping radar systems online. Now, power came back eventually, which is partially the point. These weapons aren't always about permanent destruction. They're about disruption. Turn off the grid, and suddenly air defenses, communications, logistics, and industrial systems all start having a very bad day. At exactly the moment when you're doing other things they'd rather be paying attention to. These systems were never classified in the way that, say, signals intelligence capabilities are, but they were also never particularly publicized. That's why most people have never heard of graphite bombs. They lived in this quiet corner of the strike planning world, something mission planners knew about, something you'd see in targeting doctrine, but not something that made it into press briefings. The reason is that graphite bombs sit in an uncomfortable category. They're non-lethal in the traditional sense. They're not designed to kill people, but they are strategically brutal. A prolonged blackout in winter kills people through exposure, in hospitals, and infrastructure failures. Governments don't love talking about weapons that blur that line, so they were used effectively and then mostly not discussed until today. So now we come back to Ukraine. Russian sources, specifically Telegram channels affiliated with Russian military bloggers, are claiming that Ukrainian drones struck targets in occupied Donetsk using graphite-based munitions. The footage shows unusual warhead fragments and what appears to be fine filament-like material at the strike site. Now, a few things to hold in your head at once. First, Russian mil bloggers are not a reliable source. They're occasionally accurate, often wrong, and always operating with an agenda. Sometimes pro-Kremlin, sometimes critical of the military leadership, almost never neutral. Taking their claims at face value would be a mistake. Second, the footage itself is ambiguous. Filament-like debris at a drone strike site could be graphite fibers. It could also be wiring, structural material, or any number of things that look similar in a grainy video shot at night. Third, and this is important, Ukraine hasn't confirmed anything, which tells us nothing either way. Ukraine rarely confirms specific weapons capabilities while they're being actively used. What we can say is that the claim exists, and the physical evidence is at least consistent with the claim, and the tactical logic for why Ukraine would attempt this is airtight. But let's be honest about what we don't know. We don't have a confirmation from Ukrainian military sources, we don't have independent forensic analysis of the debris, and we don't know if the filaments shown are graphite or something more mundane. This is a claim that deserves serious analysis. It does not yet deserve serious certainty. Keep that in mind as we work through the implications, because the implications are significant regardless of whether that specific incident is real, because the capability absolutely is. That said, if Ukraine is doing this, it makes perfect sense. Look at what Ukraine has been consistently targeting for the past 2 years. Oil refineries, power generation facilities, military production plants, rail hubs, and switching stations, all of it electricity dependent. All of it vulnerable not just to physical destruction, but to electrical disruption. Now imagine you don't have to destroy the facility. You just have to shut it off. That's faster, that's cheaper, and that's often dramatically harder to defend against. You can protect a power plant from a missile. You can build hardened structures, dispersal, point defense. But how do you protect an open-air switchgear from a cloud of conductive fibers dispersed upwind? The attack surface is the air itself. So here's where the story gets genuinely novel, and why I think it deserves more attention than it's getting in the news right now. Historically, graphite bombs were delivered from high-end systems. Cruise missiles, stealth aircraft, expensive, scarce, and limited to militaries with serious air power. The BLU-114 Bravo required a Tomahawk to get to where it was going. That meant the capability was inherently constrained by the delivery platform. Now imagine someone stripping that constraint completely. Ukraine has demonstrated repeatedly and convincingly that it can put a custom payload on a small drone and fly it hundreds of kilometers into Russian-held territory. They've done it with explosive warheads, they've done it with incendiary materials, they've done it against targets that 2 years ago nobody thought a drone could reach, like the A-50 mainstay. So the question becomes, what happens when you mount a graphite dispersal package on a platform that costs a couple $100s? That also requires no air force to deploy. Well, you've just democratized a strategic weapon. Let that sink in. A capability that previously required cruise missiles and nation-state level stealth jets now fits in the back of a van. The cost exchange inverts completely. Russia's power infrastructure across occupied Ukraine and into Russian territory itself becomes exposed to a threat that has no obvious countermeasure and an essentially unlimited magazine, because Ukraine can build these faster than Russia can clean substations. That's not an incremental capability upgrade. This is a category change, and the strategic effect compounds in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Power isn't just the lights, it's the connective tissue of a modern military. Radar systems need power, command centers need power, communications networks, missile guidance systems, rail switching, drone manufacturing, ammunition production. All of it runs on electricity. A sustained campaign targeting Russia's electrical infrastructure degrades every military system that plugs into a wall. And here's the compounding element. Electrical disruption is episodic, but cumulative. A grid that gets hit repeatedly doesn't just go down and come back. It accumulates damage to transformers that are hard to replace, to switchgear that takes months to produce, to maintenance crews that are finite. Russia's industrial base was already struggling to keep occupied territories' infrastructure functional before any of this. Add a systematic graphite campaign to that list of problems, and the recovery timeline starts to stretch. Now, there is a catch. As I mentioned, graphite attacks are just temporary. Clean crews can restore power relatively quickly if they can access the affected equipment, remove the fibers quickly, and reset the system safely. Iraq restored significant portions of its grid within days of the Gulf War strikes. Serbia's power came back faster than NATO planners had anticipated. That's why, historically, these strikes aren't used as a one-time knockout. And also why they're not war crimes. Typically, it would be a war crime to attack electrical substations if it is used more by civilians disproportionately than the military. But if it's temporary, it doesn't sort of fall into that war crime category. Still, it does degrade nerves, it stretches those maintenance crews, and it stretches and puts pressure on that infrastructure itself over time through sheer attrition. Ukraine has shown it understands this logic. Its drone campaigns against Russian oil refineries wasn't a single dramatic strike, it was a methodical, sustained tempo of attacks that forced Russia to divert air defenses, draw down refinery output, and spend heavily on repair. Graphite weapons fit naturally into that same operational philosophy. Hit it, let them fix it, hit it again, keep the cost on their side of the ledger. Okay, so here's the takeaway. Whether or not Ukraine is actively using graphite warheads right now, and I'll keep digging and I'll update right here on YouTube once I have the answer, the fact that this is even being credibly discussed tells you something important about where this war is heading. The trajectory of Ukraine's strike campaign has been consistently towards smarter, not just bigger. Longer range, lower cost, more precision, harder to defend against. Graphite weapons fit that pattern perfectly. They're cheap to produce relative to the damage they cause. They're difficult to intercept. They target the systems that underpin everything else. And they create dilemmas that kinetic weapons don't. Because you can rebuild a bombed power plant, but you can't design your switchgear to be immune to physics. If Ukraine has found a way to put that capability on a drone, well, it hasn't just added another weapon to the inventory, it's changed what the word strike means. So if Russia is telling the truth for once, and that's always a risky bet, then Ukraine may have just added another tool to its playbook. Remember, graphite weapons aren't top secret. Ukraine could have easily built one, especially with their level of engineering talent. And in this war, smarter engineering tends to matter quite a bit. All right, that's the story. If you want to help support the channel and keep this kind of analysis going, you can join as a member for about $3 a month. It's a simple way to back the work that I do without me having to resort to sponsored segments. If not, no pressure at all. Just make sure you regularly subscribe so you stay in the loop as this war keeps evolving. And if you're the type who wants the deeper cuts, the longer reads, the stuff I don't always put on YouTube, I'm over on Substack. I'll throw that QR code up on the screen. You can scan it and jump in. Appreciate you being here. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.